The forest cursed every healer before her, but her breath alone forced the Alpha King to shift back. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Hey Quay Lai Voi Nin Vat Chin. Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the forest where the light thinned and the air felt measured, as if every breath had to be earned. She was not tall, not armored, not marked by symbols of rank or power. Her boots were worn, her jacket smelled faintly of pine and clean soap, and her hands were steady in a way that came from practice rather than courage. The forest had a reputation measured in years, and names no one said out loud. Every healer before her had tried to change it, and every healer before her had failed, not because they lacked skill, but because the forest did not accept force or pleading. Evelyn knew this as she stepped forward, counting her pace in feet, not rushing, letting the ground decide how quickly she could enter. The temperature dipped a few degrees as the canopy closed, the sound thinning to a hush that pressed against her ears. She focused on simple things, the weight of her pack, the rhythm of her steps, the way her breath stayed slow even when the air felt heavier. Somewhere deeper within, something large moved, not in a rush, not in anger, but with the certainty of a ruler who had never needed permission. The Alpha King did not announce himself. He never had to. The forest adjusted around his presence the way water reshapes around a stone, and Evelyn felt that change before she saw anything at all. She stopped, not because she was afraid, but because stopping felt correct. She remembered what had drawn her here. Not a promise of glory, not a command, but a simple question she had asked herself months ago, about whether healing was something you did to the world or something you offered it. The stories said the Alpha King was bound to the forest by a curse older than any map, that he had forgotten what it meant to be anything else. Evelyn did not argue with stories. She let them pass through her like wind through branches. When the ground seemed to settle, she took one more step, then another, careful to keep her shoulders relaxed, her jaw loose, her breath even. The forest watched. It always did. And for the first time in a very long while, it did not immediately turn away. Evelyn waited without checking the time, because time behaved differently beneath the canopy, stretching and folding until minutes felt like miles. The forest seemed closer now, not physically, but attentively, like a room that had gone quiet to hear a single voice. She adjusted the strap of her pack by half an inch and let her hands rest at her sides, palms open, a habit learned from long nights with patients who trusted calm more than tools. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and old leaves, not rot, not sweetness, just age, and she noted it the way she noted a pulse, without judgment. A shape resolved between the trunks ahead, not stepping forward, simply becoming clearer, as if it had always been there, and she was finally allowed to see it. The Alpha King did not move like a man or an animal, but like a boundary given form, tall, grounded, every line of him defined by purpose rather than muscle. Evelyn felt the pressure of his attention the way a change in weather presses against the sinuses, steady and undeniable. She did not bow. She did not speak. She slowed her breathing until it matched the quiet around her, for seconds in, for seconds out, the count she used when panic threatened to outrun reason. The ground beneath her boots felt firm, not hostile, not welcoming, simply present, and she took one careful step forward, then stopped again, measuring the distance between them in yards and intent. Somewhere above, a branch creaked, and she noticed how the sound did not echo, absorbed by bark and moss as if the forest preferred secrets. The stories had said the Alpha King tested healers, but tests implied questions, and this felt more like observation. Evelyn reminded herself that she was not here to fix him, not here to prove anything, only to offer what she had always offered, attention without demand. She set her pack down slowly, the zipper whispering rather than rasping, and crouched just enough to show she could lower herself without falling apart. Her heartbeat stayed even. She felt fear arrive and settle, not as a command, but as information, and she thanked it silently for doing its job. The Alpha King's presence shifted, a subtle recalibration, like a compass needle responding to a magnetic field, and Evelyn felt the forest adjust with him, the temperature warming by a degree or two, the air less tight against her lungs. She thought of the long line of healers before her, of the different ways people tried to matter, and chose stillness instead. When she inhaled, it was slow and unforced. When she exhaled, it carried nothing with it except warmth, the simple proof that she was alive and not in a hurry to be anything else. The Alpha King did not retreat. He did not advance. He watched, and for the first time since she had crossed the tree line, Evelyn felt that watching was enough. Evelyn became aware of the smallest changes first, the kind you notice only when you are listening with your whole body, the way the air no longer pressed against her chest, the way the forest seemed to exhale at the same pace she did. She did not look directly at the Alpha King, not out of fear, but because direct focus felt unnecessary, like staring at the horizon when you already know it is there. Instead, she softened her gaze, letting the details come to her without pulling them closer, the texture of bark, the faint movement of moss responding to a breeze that barely existed. She shifted her weight once, slow and deliberate, making sure the motion carried no urgency, and felt the ground accept it without protest. Somewhere within that towering presence ahead of her, something ancient adjusted, not retreating, not advancing, but recalculating, and the forest followed that internal shift like a loyal echo. Evelyn thought of patients who had forgotten how to relax, how pain became a language they spoke fluently, because it was the only one that made sense anymore. You did not argue with that kind of pain. You sat with it until it remembered other words. She lowered herself to one knee, not a bow, not submission, simply a posture that said she was willing to stay, willing to be uncomfortable without making it someone else's problem. The Alpha King's attention narrowed, not sharply, but with focus, like a lens turning until the image came into clarity, and Evelyn felt the weight of it settle around her shoulders without crushing them. Her breath stayed steady, in through her nose, out through her mouth, warm against cool air, a small human constant in a place built on older rules. She sensed memory stirring, not hers, but his, impressions rather than images, seasons stacked on seasons, duty layered until there was no space left for rest. The forest responded in subtle ways, a leaf drifting down between them, landing soundlessly, a gesture so small it might have been coincidence if everything else had not gone so quiet. Evelyn resisted the urge to speak, knowing that words would try to shape the moment instead of letting it unfold. She reminded herself that healing was not the act of changing someone, but the act of making space for change to occur. The Alpha King shifted his stance by inches, a movement measured in restraint rather than threat, and the air warmed again, just enough that Evelyn noticed the difference against her skin. She felt a flicker of something like recognition pass through the space between them, not personal, not emotional, but foundational, the acknowledgement of a presence that did not seek to dominate or flee. Evelyn inhaled slowly and let the breath go, unguarded, unshaped, a simple release of warmth and carbon dioxide, nothing mystical, nothing forced. The forest did not recoil. It did not harden. It listened, and in that listening, something that had been locked in place for a very long time began, almost imperceptibly, to loosen. Evelyn shifted just enough to remind herself that her body still belonged to her, that she could choose how to occupy the space she was in. The Alpha King remained where he was, but the distance between them no longer felt fixed, more like a concept than a measurement, something that could change without either of them moving. She reached into her pack slowly and deliberately, fingers careful. The zipper opened only halfway, revealing nothing sharp, nothing hidden, just clean cloth and a small metal canteen dulled by years of use. She set it beside her knee, not offering it, not pushing it forward, simply placing it where it could be seen. The forest reacted first, a subtle tightening, leaves angling inward, the air cooling by a fraction, as if reminding her of the rules that had ended every attempt before hers. Evelyn noticed and paused, her hand hovering, then withdrawing, accepting the boundary without frustration. She rested her palms on her thighs instead, grounding herself, feeling the warmth of her own skin through fabric. The Alpha King's attention deepened, not sharp, not hostile, but focused, like a tide pulling quietly at the shore. Evelyn considered what healers usually did in moments like this, how they reached, how they named problems, how they tried to become necessary. She chose a different path. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in surrender, but to check in with herself, to ensure her breath remained slow and unforced, to make sure her presence stayed uncomplicated. When she opened them again, she found the forest watching more than resisting, branches no longer angled like warning signs, but like listeners leaning closer. She took another breath and let it out, not toward the Alpha King, not as an offering, simply as proof of continuity, of a human rhythm that did not require permission to exist. The Alpha King shifted, a change measured in tension rather than distance, and Evelyn sensed confusion there, not weakness, but unfamiliarity, as if the expected pattern had been interrupted. She did not capitalize on it. She stayed still. The ground beneath her knee felt warmer now, the chill receding in increments so small they could have been imagined, if not for the way her shoulders loosened in response. Evelyn remembered being taught that the body often healed faster than the mind, that safety had to be felt before it could be understood. She wondered if Forrest remembered that too. The Alpha King's presence rippled outward, not aggressively, but inquisitively, and the trees answered with quiet compliance, leaves settling, trunks no longer creaking under invisible strain. Evelyn felt the urge to speak rise and pass, words dissolving before they reached her tongue, unnecessary, even intrusive. She stayed with her breath, with the warmth it carried, with the simple fact of being there without trying to win. The forest did not curse her. It did not reward her. It allowed her to remain. And in that allowance, in that fragile, unspoken permission, Evelyn sensed the beginning of something fragile and rare, not a breakthrough, not a victory, but the first moment in a very long time when nothing demanded to be conquered. Evelyn stayed where she was, not frozen but settled, the way a lake settles after a stone sinks beyond sight. The forest no longer felt like a wall pressing inward, but like a presence sharing the same room, attentive without leaning too close. She sensed the Alpha King's awareness shifting again, not circling her now, but widening, as if his attention had room to expand without losing its center. The air carried a different quality, warmer by a few degrees, softer against her face, and she recognized it as the same change she felt in a hospital room when a patient stopped bracing for pain. She resisted the urge to catalog the moment, to pin it down with meaning, knowing that doing so would tighten her grip when looseness was what mattered. She rested her weight back onto both feet and rose just enough to ease the pressure in her knee, careful to move slowly, to keep the rhythm of her body predictable. The Alpha King did not recoil. He did not advance. Instead, the space between them grew quieter, not empty, but uncluttered, as if something unnecessary had been removed. Evelyn let her shoulders drop, felt the subtle release ripple down her spine, and breathed again, the same steady pattern, for seconds in, for seconds out, warmth carried gently into cool air. She became aware of the forest responding not to her presence, but to her consistency, the way branches stopped angling defensively, the way the ground felt less rigid beneath her boots. The Alpha King's outline seemed less absolute now, not smaller, not weaker, but more defined, as if boundaries could exist without being sharp. Evelyn thought of how often people confused stillness with passivity, how remaining present without acting was sometimes the hardest choice. She held that line, choosing not to reach for the canteen, not to offer tools or words, trusting that the most useful thing she had already arrived with her. A faint sound threaded through the silence, not a growl, not a warning, but something closer to a breath drawn deep and released, slower than hers, heavier, but unmistakably deliberate. Evelyn felt it brush against her awareness and did not flinch. She allowed herself a small adjustment of posture, aligning her spine, planting her feet more firmly, a signal of readiness without challenge. The forest seemed to recognize it, the temperature stabilizing, the air no longer shifting with every micro-movement. She noticed details she had not before, the way light filtered through leaves in uneven bands, the way dust motes drifted and settled without hurry. Time felt less insistent here, not stalled, but patient. Evelyn realized that this was the moment every healer before her had rushed through or tried to fill, the quiet where nothing obvious happened and everything essential waited. She stayed with it. She breathed, And somewhere within the Alpha King, something old and tired paused its endless vigilance, not surrendering, not breaking, simply resting for the first time in longer than memory could measure. Evelyn sensed the shift before she understood it, the way a room feels different when someone who has been holding their breath finally lets it go. The Alpha King's presence no longer pressed outward in every direction, no longer braced against an unseen threat, and the forest mirrored that change with a subtle easing, leaves settling into more natural angles, light slipping through the canopy without resistance. Evelyn did not interpret it as trust, not yet, but as a pause in a long habit of defense. She adjusted her stance by a few inches, redistributing her weight, so both feet felt equally grounded, a small human correction that kept her balanced without announcing itself. The air carried a faint warmth now, noticeable against her cheeks, and she realized she was no longer counting her breaths because they no longer needed management. Somewhere in the space between them, something ancient tested the idea of stillness without vigilance. Evelyn thought of how often people mistook survival for living, how instincts sharpened by necessity could become cages long after the danger had passed. She did not reach for that thought, did not push it outward. She simply allowed it to exist alongside her breath. The Alpha King's outline shifted again, not in shape, but in intention, as if the energy holding him rigid had begun to question its own purpose. Evelyn felt a ripple of that uncertainty touch the forest, branches responding with a faint rustle that sounded less like warning and more like curiosity. She did not fill the moment with reassurance or promises. She stayed. She inhaled slowly, letting the air expand her chest, then released it without effort, warmth carrying forward, dispersing naturally, unclaimed. The forest did not recoil. It seemed to recognize the pattern now, the absence of force, the consistency of presence. Evelyn noticed how her hands rested loosely at her sides, fingers relaxed, no longer curled in readiness, and she allowed that openness to remain visible. The Alpha King's attention focused inward for a moment, a withdrawal that was not retreat but reflection, and Evelyn sensed memory stirring there, not images, but sensations, the echo of choice, the weight of decisions made again and again until they felt inevitable. She wondered if he remembered what it felt like to choose differently. The air warmed another fraction, enough that Evelyn felt it along her forearms, and she resisted the urge to smile, knowing that even subtle expressions could be misread here. She let her face remain neutral, open, unguarded. The forest seemed to lean closer without closing the distance, an attentive quiet replacing the tension that had defined it for so long. Evelyn realized this was the true conflict, not between her and the Alpha King, but within him, between the instinct that had kept everything locked in place and the faint recognition that something else was possible. She did not try to resolve it. She allowed it to exist. Her breath continued its slow rhythm, unremarkable, human, steady. And in that rhythm, the forest found something it had not felt in a very long time. Not submission, not control, but the permission to change without being forced. Evelyn felt the moment approach not as a surge, but as a thinning, the way fog lifts without announcing itself, and suddenly the shape of things becomes clearer. The Alpha King's presence drew inward, not collapsing, not weakening, but concentrating, and the forest followed with a collective hush that felt deliberate, expectant. She sensed that whatever held him in place was no longer only instinct, but memory, the echo of choices repeated so often they had hardened into law. Evelyn did not move closer. She did not retreat. She understood now that proximity was not measured in steps, but in willingness. She drew a slow breath, deeper than before, filling her lungs fully, letting her ribs expand, feeling the familiar stretch beneath her jacket, grounding herself in the simple mechanics of being alive. When she released it, she did not shape the exhale, did not aim it or offer it. She simply let it leave her, warm and steady, dissipating into the air that now felt receptive rather than tense. The forest reacted first, not dramatically, but unmistakably, a subtle tremor passing through leaves and branches like a shared realization. The Alpha King's attention snapped back outward, not in alarm, but in recognition, as if something essential had been named without words. Evelyn felt the shift ripple through him, a hesitation where certainty had always lived, a question forming where there had only been command. She remained still, trusting that any movement now would distract from what was unfolding. The air grew warmer, enough that she noticed the change along her neck and forearms, and she realized the forest was no longer bracing against her presence, but accommodating it. The Alpha King's form seemed to waver, not physically changing, but losing the rigidity that had defined him, his stance no longer locked into a single purpose. Evelyn sensed the strain there, not pain, but effort, the kind that comes with letting go of something that once ensured survival. She did not rush to ease it. She knew that some transitions required space, required the dignity of being faced without interference. She took another breath, slower this time, and let it go with the same unremarkable warmth, her body doing what it had done since birth, without ceremony. The forest held that breath as if it mattered. The Alpha King's presence shuddered, a contained tremor, like a structure tested by a new load, and Evelyn felt a wave of exhaustion radiate outward, not her own, but his, the fatigue of endless vigilance finally acknowledged. She stayed anchored, her feet firm against the ground, her posture open, signaling nothing but availability. The silence deepened, not empty, but full, dense with possibility. Evelyn realized that this was the edge every healer before her had reached, and then tried to push past, mistaking transition for resistance. She did not push. She breathed. And in that breath, something ancient loosened its grip, not broken, not defeated, but finally given permission to change. Evelyn noticed the change as a soft misalignment, the way a reflection wavers before the surface of water fully settles. The Alpha King's presence no longer held a single shape, no longer anchored itself to the rigid outline that had defined him for so long, and the forest responded with a collective stillness that felt almost reverent. She remained where she was, aware that this moment did not belong to her, that her role was not to witness triumph, but to maintain the conditions that allowed transition to complete itself. The air warmed steadily, not in a rush, but with the patience of sunlight returning after a long winter, and she felt it along her face, her hands, her collarbone, the forest no longer resisting her warmth, but sharing it. The Alpha King's attention turned inward completely now, a focus so deep it seemed to draw the surrounding space with it, and Evelyn sensed the effort involved, not strain, not pain, but the careful recalibration of something that had forgotten how to be flexible. She recognized it from her own life, from moments when letting go of an old role felt riskier than holding it forever. The forest shifted in response, branches settling into new alignments, shadows rearranging themselves as if the light had been given permission to move differently. Evelyn did not speak. She did not step forward. She breathed, slow and steady, her exhale carrying the same unremarkable warmth, again and again, until the pattern felt shared rather than solitary. The Alpha King's form began to soften at the edges, not dissolving, not collapsing, but redefining itself, lines loosening, posture easing, as if something heavy had been set down gently rather than dropped. Evelyn felt a wave of recognition pass through the space between them, not emotional, not personal, but deeply human, the acknowledgement of choice reclaimed. The forest responded with a quiet release, a sound too subtle to name, like a held breath finally allowed to end. The Alpha King's presence condensed, drew inward, then steadied, no longer expansive and consuming, but contained, deliberate, aware. Evelyn sensed the shift complete itself without spectacle, without force, the way a door closes not with a slam, but with a soft, decisive click. The air felt different now, clearer, lighter, and she realized she was no longer the only one breathing at that measured pace. The Alpha King's breath joined hers, slower than before, heavier, but undeniably intentional, and with it came a profound fatigue, the kind that follows release rather than struggle. Evelyn stayed grounded, her feet firm, her posture open, signaling no claim, no expectation. The forest accepted the change. Without protest, without celebration, simply adjusting, as living systems do when balance is restored rather than imposed. She understood then that the curse had never been a punishment, only a pattern reinforced by fear and necessity, waiting for the moment it could be questioned without threat. Evelyn allowed herself one more slow breath, then another, and in the quiet that followed, she felt the Alpha King fully present in a way he had not been for centuries, no longer bound solely by instinct, no longer defined only by survival, but standing at the edge of something new, human again, because someone had finally given him the space to choose. Evelyn understood it was over not because something ended, but because nothing else needed to happen. The forest settled into itself with a quiet confidence, branches no longer leaning inward, light threading through leaves in steady patterns that did not shift with tension. The air felt breathable in a new way, not lighter, not thinner, simply honest. She noticed her own body respond, shoulders easing, jaw unclenching, the subtle signals of safety she had learned to recognize over years of listening to others. The Alpha King stood present without imposing, his attention no longer stretched across every direction at once, but centered, contained, deliberate. He did not approach. He did not retreat. He remained, and in that remaining there was choice rather than compulsion. Evelyn did not speak. She sensed that words would try to define what had happened, and definition would shrink it. Instead, she allowed the quiet to hold. A faint breeze moved through the canopy, carrying the scent of clean earth and leaves warmed by filtered sunlight, and she realized how long it had been since the forest had smelled like this, alive without urgency. She took one last slow breath, not deeper than before, not ceremonial, simply the same human rhythm that had brought her here and carried her through. When she released it, she felt no resistance, no echo of warning, only the natural dispersal of warmth into a space that no longer rejected it. The Alpha King's presence acknowledged that breath with a subtle shift, a grounding that felt like acceptance without ownership. Evelyn allowed herself a small nod, not to him alone, but to the forest, to the moment, to the understanding that she had not been a solution, only a reminder. She reached down and closed her pack, the zipper quiet, careful not to disturb the stillness that now felt earned rather than enforced. She turned slowly, making no attempt to claim attention, trusting that what mattered did not require her to be seen leaving. As she walked back toward the thinning edge of the trees, her steps measured in feet and patience, the forest parted without effort, branches yielding naturally, light opening ahead. She did not look back, not out of disregard, but out of respect, knowing that some acknowledgments were strongest when left unobserved. The air grew cooler as she approached the boundary, the familiar pressure of the world beyond returning gradually, and she welcomed it, grounded in the knowledge that balance did not require permanence. At the edge, she paused once, letting the moment settle fully, feeling the quiet behind her hold steady without clinging. Then she stepped forward, crossing out of the forest as simply as she had entered, unchanged in body, altered in understanding. Behind her, the forest remained, no longer cursed, no longer guarded by instinct alone, breathing at its own pace. And somewhere within it, an Alpha King stood human again, not because he had been conquered, not because he had been healed, but because someone had finally stayed long enough, quietly enough, to remind him that he could choose.